down here on I-10. I thought it might be an interesting time to take a video and record a story that I'd heard and I've never seen in writing, so I thought I might as well record it in video. So anyway, we're approaching the, right now we're coming down into the Animas Valley of New Mexico. We're rapidly approaching the Arizona state line. The lower mountains that you see in the distance are the Peloncillo Mountains, and there's a pass through the Peloncillos, which is actually the Continental Divide. It brings us down into the Pacific drainage. We're still actually east of the Rockies, so to speak, and the things you see ahead of you are what the Rockies amount to down here. And then the higher mountains you can see in the distance are the Chiricahua Mountains. And on the other side of the Chiricahua Mountains in Arizona is the Sulphur Spring Valley and the town of Bowie. Bowie, I'm not sure how they say it in this area. Arizona is at the north end of the Sulphur Springs Valley. So in the 1950s, my father was working at the Faraway Ranch, which is over on the west side of the Chiricahua Mountains. And he was working for a man, an elderly man named Ben Erickson. And he was a child of like original 1800 era pioneers. So as you might imagine, Ben Erickson remembered back into the 1890s in the Arizona territory. You know, he remembered almost to the OK Corral era, certainly remembered Indian wars. But anyway, one story that Ben gave was of the last Mexican cattle drive. So down at the south end of the Sulphur Springs Valley, there's a pass over the mountains into Old Mexico. And up until a certain time, there was an entire massive cattle drive era involving Mexico that went on much later than your classic American cattle drive era, and I'm talking into the 20th century. So what was done was that there would be groups of, in those days the border was non-existent, so there would be groups of Mexican, and or American cowboys would go far down into Chihuahua and Sonora, and they would put together enormous droves of range cattle. What they would do is they'd travel, from way down in the Mexican Sierra Madre, and as they went north, each ranch that they came to, they would pick up the cattle from that ranch and add them to the herd. And that, of course, is why the iron brand was such a big deal in those days, is it was truly absolutely essential to establish ownership of cattle. So you'd have this enormous, mixed herd of, horned cattle with, every kind of, exotic Spanish and Mexican brand imaginable, and they'd push them up to the U.S. border down at the south end of the Sulphur Springs Valley. They'd cross the border, on horseback, just no trucking in those days, just on horseback, driving the cattle, and they would come up on the U.S. side, and then the ranches like the Faraway and the other ranches on the American side, they would push their branded cattle down into this enormous Mexican herd, and the entire herd would be pushed up to Bowie, Arizona, where they would put them in pens, and they would load them onto the railroad. And I don't know how far they shipped them in the railroad, at a minimum, into San Antonio. For all I know, some of those cattle may have gone all the way to Chicago. I really don't know, but at a minimum, they'd bring them up to the Midwest feedlots and into the American market. And I don't remember the exact date, but I believe that the final open range Mexican cattle drive through the Sulphur Springs Valley was, I think it was either 1924 is the date that comes to my mind. And I don't really know what halted it. It may have been that, they got more infrastructure in Mexico so that they could come up on the train from Mexico, or it may simply be that the border became a reality, with the concern about animal disease and so on and so forth. It became a much more modern country after the 20s. You weren't just going to, push 10,000 Mexican cattle over the border with you know, no formalities. But anyway, so the story of the last big Mexican cattle drive to Bowie, and I've literally never seen this written, but it's a first-hand recollection of how it went down right on the other side of those mountains.